Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intelligence Brief, where we give you the best of what you may have missed throughout the week. I know everybody doesn't have a chance to watch every show, but I don't want you to miss the things that are really important, especially with so much going on in the world right now. It would be easy to miss some of the things that are important. We're going to give that to you today. So let's jump right into it. So we started off earlier this week with Matthew Hoh talking about how Zelensky is looking to perhaps get more help from the United States and to help draw the United States into a war in some cases. Here's what Matt had to say about that.
Look how successful the Israeli lobby is. And so if you're the Ukrainians, if you're anybody, you have to be looking at this and saying, we have to emulate that. Look, it's not that easy to bribe the American system, to game the American political system, to control it. It's built that way. It's a system of legalized bribery. So in order for us to get what we need from the United States, we have to emulate the Israelis and how they do things.
Now, the context with what he was saying there, we were talking about how the Israel side basically does whatever they want to do. When Biden says we want a two-state solution, Netanyahu comes out and says, yeah, there ain't going to be one. When Biden says, hey, we don't want you to go into Rafah in the south, they go into Rafah in the south. Every time we've asked them not to do something, they do whatever they want to do. And then when the Israel side blew up an Iranian embassy in Syria, and then Iran retaliated by sending a large drone and missile barrage, the United States went in there to help him and actually used the U.S. Air Force to intercept a large number of those missiles and drones. Zelensky is saying, hey, man, what about me? So he's looking at the same thing. And so now he's trying to say, and he actually did in a quote earlier this week, to where he said, hey, if it's good enough in the Middle East, why isn't it good enough here? He's actually lobbying to get Western air power, i.e. the United States primarily, to go into the war on his behalf and fight in the air. Now, this harkens back to the very first few weeks of the war when he was asking for NATO air cover. He actually wanted the United States to lead a consortium in the air to actually fight for Ukraine, to basically be their air force. That was, of course, rejected because that would put us in a direct belligerent role and get us into a war. Well, now then, Zelensky is seeing that, hey, it worked for Israel because they took this provocative action that spawned a military response. And then the U.S. went in, and along with others, the French and the Jordanians, at a minimum, went in and literally fought for them in the air. So he's saying, what about us? Now, I can understand him saying that. That makes sense from his perspective. And I feel very confident that if I was the leader of Ukraine under the exact same circumstances, I would be just as adamant saying, hey, what about me? But I'm not on the Ukraine side. I'm not in his position. Instead, I'm in our position of being an American. And look, the same thing that existed in the first weeks of the war exists today. The United States is not going to provide air cover for the Ukrainian side. We're not going to send our jets to fight and fly against Russian air power, fire targets against Russia in Ukrainian airspace, especially. We're just not going to do it. It doesn't matter what happens in Israel. And by the way, let's look at that situation. Even though I think that that's a bad policy, what's Iran going to do? I mean, are they going to launch their air force and come after us? Do they have the ability to, launch nuclear weapons? Of course they don't. And Israel wants to avoid a war at all costs. They want this to be over with. They don't want to escalate it. And even then, the U.S. just basically went into neutral territory and shot down incoming missiles. They didn't go into Iranian airspace. They didn't engage any Iranian targets, etc. They just shot down missiles there. But because there's really nothing Ukraine can or Iran can do, whether they want to or not. That's not the case on the Russian side. The Russians has a very powerful air force that it could use against Western aircraft. And more to the point, they have strong air defenses that could reach out from all number of locations, both inside Ukraine and inside Russia, to take down our aircraft should we actually get engaged right there. Iran couldn't. Iran didn't have the ability to reach out and hit our aircraft from the distances we were coming from. And they of course, they don't want to do that anyway because they're worried about a war. Russia, on the other hand, does have the capability and is clearly getting more and more agitated, especially because the war has been taken onto their soil. The U.S. weapons, Western weapons, have now been used on the ground inside of Russia. And there's missiles have already been going in to a certain extent. Zelensky's trying to get that extended as well, and it's not going to work. because despite President Biden's willingness to do lots of things and just keep inching up to the edge so far, up to this point, all throughout the war, he has not been willing to do anything that's going to overtly get us drawn into the war, no matter what Zelensky wants. And of course, there's good reason for that. Number one, because we don't want to get drawn into a war with Russia, but also it's not going to make any difference. If there was a situation to where the Ukraine side had a really strong and capable land force, and if only they had air cover that could possibly drive Russia out and somehow it wouldn't go nuclear, there would be at least a case to be made and an argument to be engaged with to say, should the United States do that or not? Should the Western do that or not? But it's not. There is no possibility. The only thing that we can accomplish by doing what Zelensky is asking for here is get drawn into a war. There's no upside. It's not like by doing this we could what? Delay the end game. We could delay the loss of the Ukraine side because they don't have a capable army. They're getting driven back everywhere. This foray into Kursk has already reached its apex. It's now starting to shrink. The Russians are moving more troops in there. Ukraine has tried to put more reinforcements up there. And now that over the last 24 hours, I think for the first time in this war, there has been effectively no forward movement anywhere by the Ukraine side, but there have been a couple of Russian incursions along the edges of it to start taking the stuff back. And that's likely going to continue. So the only thing we can do is to actually get ourselves drawn into a war, but it won't change the outcome. And of course, logically, that should lead to the conclusion, well, then we should push for a negotiated settlement. Since the war can't be won militarily, since even our Air Force would not change the outcome on the ground, then we should start doing what makes sense and get the war over with so that there's no possibility of even accidental plunging into a war. And unfortunately, we're not that smart. Apparently, we're not getting that done.
Hey, Danny, we've got some breaking news here, and maybe you had seen it beforehand, but it's something that I'm just coming across right now. Zelensky has dismissed his Air Force commander.
I can't help but see that.
Right, and you can't help but think, is this tied anything to the F-16 that supposedly crashed early in the week?
Yeah, and take a look at our show on that earlier. We had, I think it was yesterday, we did something when it was breaking on the F-16. That's on our channel. You can go back and look at that. But I mean, the timing couldn't be any worse for the Ukraine side, and certainly the performance of the Air Force. There's probably more that we know. I haven't had a chance to even read the headlines. I haven't seen it, so I can only speculate at this point. But what we can say for absolute certain is that this claim that the F-16s were going to make a difference, and if this Air Force general was part of that claim, and now that it's been exposed as being inaccurate, or that there was also some reports uncorroborated so far, but they're starting to come up that it might have been a Patriot air defense missile on the Ukrainian side that actually shot down its own missile because of lack of coordination. If that was true, that would not be surprising to find out that the Air Force general in charge of that, who didn't make the coordination, could be released. I don't know yet. As soon as we find out, we'll let you know. But this just shows more and more that a lot of the wheels are coming off. Remember, Ukraine in the past year or so has fired its defense minister for corruption. They fired the ground commander for apparently being incapable of doing it. They brought in a new one. He's been unsuccessful. Now they fired their Air Force general. I mean, this is what happens when the wheels start coming off. You're looking for somebody to blame everywhere, and they're pointing fingers, and all the key leaders keep coming off while the front lines keep deteriorating left and right. That tells you something, which should tell the United States, hey, man, seriously, it's time to start seeking a negotiated settlement on whatever the best terms that are available we can get, and let's close this deal off. That's what we should do. Okay, moving on now. We had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on. He was talking about some issues related to the Israel-Hamas war and the United States' participation in that and its role in it. But there's also an issue of free speech, which he addressed.
Everything is treated now in partisan terms. If you say the wrong word, you're deplatformed. You can't speak. The First Amendment is pretty much a dead letter when it comes to Israel. The campuses are about to go up in flames again, I guess, or have peaceful demonstrations. The university administrators are enacting rules which make any criticism of Zionism equivalent to anti-Semitism, even when Jews criticize Zionism, which to their credit, more and more of them do. So I think the gaslighting is going to go on until November 5th and beyond. And why? Our politics are dominated by Zionist interests.
Now, if you saw our show earlier today talking about the Harris interview on CNN last night, you saw an example of what he's talking about here. Nobody can say anything publicly, especially in the political world, that's almost anything except fealty to the nation of Israel, and especially to Benjamin Netanyahu, who just, again, you can say whatever you want to with words, but the actions are unambiguous that the U.S. has basically subordinated its foreign policy in the Middle East to Israel. Whatever Benjamin Netanyahu wants is what Benjamin Netanyahu gets. And what we want don't seem to go roll into that. So even when people are asked, what do you think, if they don't like the policies that our government is doing, if they think, no, I think we should take a lot more concern about the innocent Palestinian people who are dying by the tens of thousands, you stand a good chance of getting shut down, either vehemently or shadow banning, they call it. And you've seen that. He mentioned there what happened on campuses last year, that any kind of protest that was going on to help the Palestinian cause was immediately demeaned as a pro-Hamas deal. And certainly there were a few of those. There's no question there were some, but they were relatively small percentage-wise. The vast majority of those were just pro-Palestinian civilians and that wanted the killing to stop. And yet they were all publicly painted with that one brush of pro-Hamas and anti-Israeli. That's the way it was accrued. But as he also pointed out there, a great many of those protests were Jews. So it's a little weird to be calling Jews anti-Jewish, because they're standing up for what they believe is right. And certainly that's happening to a certain degree, even within Israel, but the numbers are below 50%, because apparently more than 50% still support Benjamin Netanyahu. So you have that going on there. But at some point we have to wonder, where does free speech start and subversion begin? Because we're supposed to have the freedom of speech to say whatever we want to say and support whoever we want, as long as we don't break any laws. But now then it's being turned into something worse than that, to where you have the freedom to say anything we like. And if you don't, then we're going to get after it. And of course, the politicians, again, I don't care what anybody thinks. The facts are unambiguous. We've seen it play out twice, at least this year, on the Democratic side, where there were two Democratic members of Congress that were running for re-election, and in their primaries against Democrats, their opponents were supported by the tunes of many millions of dollars in a primary. Forget about having got to the general election yet, because those two members of Congress were for the Palestinian side. And they said they didn't like the claims of genocide by the Israeli side, and they didn't like what the Israeli side was doing, and they wanted them to be changed. And as punishment, the Israeli lobby and people who are pro-Israel funded to the tune of millions of dollars to make sure they got defeated, and both of them did. And believe me, that message is sent loud and clear. And so any other member of Congress, regardless of which party, is going to think, twice, 7 times about crossing that. And only somebody who has a really strong moral code that's going to do what's right, no matter what the personal cost, is going to defer to that. They're going to say, well, I don't want to have to get defeated in a primary because of this one issue. That means that I can't do this issue over here that's important to me. So they self-censor. And believe me, the people who are pro-Israel want Netanyahu to continue to be able to do whatever he wants. He wants, whether it's presidents, senators, members of Congress, or the media, members of academia, they want to make sure all of them are either silent or are in their corner. And they just will not tolerate anybody doing anything to the contrary. One wonders, if one of these days that's going to happen to our channel. It hasn't so far. We haven't taken any heat from that. But then again, I'm not sure. We may be under the radar. The day that we get up and enough people start paying attention to us, I have a lot of confidence that we're going to find ourselves in the crosshair. We've already decided here at our channel that's not going to stop us. We're going to do what's right. We're going to obey the law. like we always have. We won't violate anything, but we will not be silent when it comes to saying the truth, especially truth that you need to hear, because when actions are being taken, I don't care how popular they are, but they ultimately lead to our harm. We will not be silent. I never have been in my career, and I damn sure won't start now. Just want to point that out. Okay, moving on now then, we had Larry Johnson, one of our popular guests on here, guy who stood in for me while I was out of town, out of the country for a while, did a fantastic job. I'll again say thanks, Larry, on that. I've never been able to rock the shirts the way you have, but I still appreciate you coming on. So he was talking about some of the issues about the Russia-Ukraine war. There are some growing indicators that Russia may defer from its previous policies that have been done over the last nearly 12 months of a slow and methodical grind on the Russian side, on the Ukraine side, moving against the Ukraine forces, especially in the east, of just methodical moving forward, not any big movements, but just a nonstop, relentless press to take, sometimes tens of hundreds of meters. Sometimes now it's starting to accelerate. Now it's sometimes in kilometers, multiple kilometers. In the last week or so, we've seen like entire villages that had previously taken months to take, one of which was in fact taken in a day, and others are coming into smaller things that are happening, literally day after day. So there's been some big movements in. So we asked Larry, what do you think the chances are that Russia is getting ready to do what they call a big arrow movement, which means launch a large offensive? Here's what he said.
Look at the last 2.5 years of this war as ADVAN, as that advanced preparation of the battlefield. Because in that process, what Russia has succeeded in doing is depleted Ukraine of its military leadership across the board, so that its units are very thin, they're untrained, they don't have any deep reserves. They've bled them of critical material, both on air defense, artillery, armor, armored fighting vehicles down the line. And in the process, they've also reduced NATO's ability to respond. So now environment is prepared that a big arrow offensive could make a lot of sense, because you're not going to risk massive casualties, because the ability of Ukraine and the West to fight back right now has been reduced. It's not saying it's eliminated, but within that, as Lavrov is making real clear, we don't have to pull up an interpreter to figure this out, that if the United States thinks that it can get into a war with Russia and that the United States is not going to get hit, they better go back and reread history, because we will get hit. Russia's not going to let us go this time. We're not going to just let all the fighting and dying and bleeding take place in Europe. That's his message, loud and clear. And I don't think there's any politician over here paying attention to it.
Well, certainly can't blame him on what he says on the last part there. And just, as Gary's showing you there, this is what when he said we have to believe Lavrov. That's one of the things that he claimed there, that these actions risk World War III, especially because there's more and more people, both Zelensky, as you heard us talk about earlier, and those in the West that say, hey, how about using more American long-range weapons anywhere in the country, anywhere in the Russian country? Don't limit it to just, in the tactical front and fight. Let's open the entire country up to it and just go crazy and hog wild. And there won't be any consequence, because there hasn't been any so far. You remember early in the war, there was like, okay, we'll give you, Stinger missiles and anti-tank missiles, shoulder launch kind of things, but we're not going to give you any offensive weapons. And they say, well, okay, well, actually, here's some 155 millimeter towed howitzers. We'll give you those and a lot of shells to go along with it. And you know what? Maybe actually some armor personnel carriers, some MRAPs and some old 113s. And they started, actually, how about some Bradley fighting vehicles and some good stuff, and then some Martyrs from Germany, and then other countries start stepping up. And then they look around and, okay, nothing happened. Cool. How about some Challenger tanks? How about some M1A1 main battle tanks, and then Stryker vehicles. And now that it got into the air defense, the Patriot air defense system. Every time we kept stepping up and people were going, okay, nothing happened. F-16s. That's the next one. Let's go ahead and get that one too. Nothing happened. Cool. Let's just keep going. Then it was the Storm Shadow missiles, the long range from British. There was some desire for some Russian, some German long range missiles. And then, of course, the ATACMS U.S. long range missiles. and those have now been used. The HIMARS mission missiles continue to be used. They're more short range stuff, but it's also stuff that has been used to fire into Russia. And again, they haven't seen any Russian response. Even when some of the U.S. missiles were used and apparently misfired over the Sevastopol beach and killed a lot of Russian civilians and hurt a bunch over the summer, again, no notable response from the Russian side. Ergo, there never will be. And that's how a lot in the West are thinking about this. There's no reason to withhold anything. Zelensky actually ridiculed us and said that we're naive if we think there will ever be a Russian red line. And so we should ignore that. That's why he invaded into the Kursk region, actually invaded Russian territory. And he said, where is anything? You see how slow they are to respond here. Many in the West see the same thing. And so there is a lot of people in the West. And Larry's last comment there was, he said, I don't think anyone in the West is listening to what Lavrov is saying or what Putin is saying or what Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, is saying. Not listening to any of those people because they've seen a lot of these reports and a lot of these claims. Putin said back in June, early June, about, emphatically, he was really angry one day in a press conference and talked about his nuclear doctrine, etc. Nothing happened because of that either. So in a certain sense, you can see why those in the West might view it this way, and they may be liable. And I think probably with enough time, we've said yes to every other request that Zelensky has had, and I bet that it won't be too much longer before he gets permission to literally fire anywhere into Russia. But the conditions aren't the same as they were before. This incursion into Kursk has set off a lot of anger, as we should understand. You should see that if the war is in Ukraine, that's one thing. But when it actually goes into Russian territory and kills Russian civilians and Russian military members on their own soil, that's a different matter. And now then, when they see their land being attacked by Western weapons, throughout their country, and it starts going more. There was a Ukraine drone, didn't get much press here in the West. But earlier this week, a Ukrainian drone flew into an apartment building in a place called Saratov in southern Russia. That's a fairly large city. I think it's about 1 million or 2 million, something like that. Didn't get much notice. Again, it flew into an apartment building. These kinds of things are getting around in Russia. Now, that's the picture of it right there. That was an apartment building there, and you can see the eerie similarities to that in 9/11 on a much smaller scale. But it has a similar impact, especially when it's combined with everything else that's happening. And we should not think that because of the way the war has gone over the last 2.5 years, that it's the way it's always going to go. And that even though we've done all these other things and there hasn't been any notable Russian response, that there never will be. Because there's a cumulative effect to stuff. And you got to think, how would you react if, say, southern Arizona was carved out by a cartel or something from Mexico, and that they say, hey, I'm tired of people interdicting and getting, taking out our people and getting our cocaine and stuff. I'm actually going to carve out a piece of southern Arizona and do whatever we want to do in there. And, would we just say, all right, you know what, we're going to send Border Patrol down there. We're going to send the National Guard and we're going to contain that thing and then move it out and then everything will be fine. I mean, can you even imagine anyone in America suggesting that? Yes, let's just, stop the incursion, push them back to Mexico, and move on with your lives. Nothing to see here, folks. Of course, we would go crazy. We would go nuts. We would be saying, all right, we're going to, number one, we're going to blame Mexico for it. We're going to hold everybody responsible. We are now going after the cartel. We're not just going to push them back to the border. We're going to keep on going until we destroy the nest wherever they came from, etc. You know that the United States would do that. We would never, ever tolerate that. Why do you think that the Russians aren't the same? That you can have attacks on buildings in their cities, that you can have attacks on Belgorod, before that this incursion into Kursk, and then now the expansion of missiles to elsewhere in their country, and there will never be a response. It appears that Russia, which has shown great patience because they genuinely don't want to escalate this. They don't want a war with NATO because it would be just really, really bad for them. It would be very difficult. You see how much trouble they're having with the one country of Ukraine. Now imagine if you now added that and you took on other countries as well. But, and here's the critical part, there is a limit to how far Russians can go, because you can see where they would come to the conclusion, if we don't do this, then the Western side is going to continue to advance and escalate, and they're going to continue to harm ourselves even more. And then one day they may bring in Western troops because nothing else has been sacrosanct. Why should that be? So you can see that there's a logic from the Russian side. We might need to take some action here, even if it risks a war, because we're already getting one. Don't underestimate people's ability to come to that kind of conclusion, and that there is a limit to anyone's patience and tolerance, even if you don't want to use the positive word of patience, the tolerance to being able to take those many hits and never do anything in response to the Western side, because we've gotten a free pass pretty much so far. Not Zelensky, I'm sorry. The foreign minister, Lavrov, came out this week, and then Ryabkov reaffirmed it, that they expressly said to the United States, don't think that you're going to be safe by your oceans anymore. Don't think that if there's war between us, that it's not going to come to your soil, that it's only going to be fought in Europe. It won't be. I don't remember hearing that direct and stark of a warning at any point, even during this war of 2.5 years. I don't remember them going that far of explicitly warning the United States. You had a special forces officer, a general officer, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, released a video where he said, hey, U.S., we're going to end this war soon. And this gets to the point of where Larry started talking about the possibility of a big arrow. We're going to wrap this war up this year. So you see, they've been incrementally going on for quite a while. But for them to be able to finish the job and go anywhere else and win a military victory, something would have to change dramatically, and there would have to be a big arrow movement, or they certainly couldn't get it done in the remainder of this year, just 4 months hence. But that's what this general said. And I don't recall, and I've been paying a lot of attention to this war, any other general going out and making a direct claim that the conflict was going to be over in a specific time frame, or he said it's going to go to World War III and it's going to be nuclear. That was one of the things. And for a special forces general to say that, that they don't do that without having it approved first or even directed from the administration. And there's been no comment from Moscow ever since, anything like repudiating what he said at all, which implies that it was planned, and there's a meaning for that. So we have to be really, really careful here that we don't continue with this arrogance to think Russia can never do anything. They haven't done anything because they can't, and they never will. And so we're free to do anything we want to do, and we can keep escalating within Russia, and there will never be a consequence. That is a very dangerous and diluted kind of thinking. And we should be thankful that this thing hasn't escalated so far. And for the reasons I've talked about earlier in this video, we need to move to a negotiated settlement, not to think about escalating. And the time to do that is right now. Next thing we talked about actually earlier today, if you hadn't seen that one today, by the way, is the third anniversary, the marking of the third year since we left Afghanistan, since the final U.S. soldier left the country, completing our shame and humiliation of being defeated by the Taliban. And I had Matt on because he and I had been talking on this issue and publicly writing on it since 2010 together. We actually had a piece we showed earlier in the day. And who's going to ever forget these images that Gary's showing here, that, some of the last ones right before the end came on the 30th of August of 2021. And now then, the question is, what has been the lessons learned? What have we learned any lessons from this, and what are the takeaways from it? And Matt had a really interesting one here, that it's not just the military or the tactical situation, but it's really even higher than that. And that is, what is the behavior, the actions, and the advice of our senior military leaders? Watch this. Whether you're talking about what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war with our activities there, it's now just become inculcated in the culture that the senior leaders will say whatever they want, whatever they think they need to in order to get the outcome they prefer, irrespective of whether it's accurate or not. And they know it's not in many cases.
Just to emphasize that point, there's two aspects to this. One, the fact that there has been no accountability for this war. That speaks to issues of justice, integrity, who we are, this idea of a higher immorality among our elites that they're allowed to get away with this by the public. The other side of it, though, is it makes certain that it happens again. If there was no consequences for the Iraq War, no consequences for the torture, no consequences for unconstitutional spying on the American people, no consequences for supporting the genocide in Gaza, it makes it certain that it happens again. It makes it inevitable.
And who's to argue with the logic that Matt laid that out with there? And you could even see some of the same fundamentals at play with what he's talking about there at the senior leader level as to what I just described you seeing with our policies in the Russia war. So I keep thinking because nothing has happened so far, we haven't had any consequences. Nothing ever will happen. So we can just keep going forward. It's the same thing at the strategic level among our senior leaders over decades of activities, because we keep making these actions that keep causing us harm, that keep causing, failures of policy, losses of war. Certainly thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have died in a lot of these wars overseas, but it hasn't hit us any. And so hasn't been any consequences, so we keep going. And folks, look, we know for sure that the Iraq war that we fought in 2003 was based on a lie, that there were weapons of mass destruction and all that. That was acknowledged. That was certain, that it was known that these things weren't there by enough of the senior leaders, and yet they went on with it anyway. And of course, what happened when it was discovered that the lie wasn't true at all and that there were no weapons of mass destruction? Nothing. Just keep going. Yep. Just keep going there. And other than a short 3-year hiatus, our troops are still there to this day. We've been told that we have to go to keep our troops in Syria to keep ourselves safe from ISIS. There's no truth to that. That people keep lying and saying that, our security is important, that we have to stay there. That's been a lie from the beginning. It's still a lie today. There's no reason for our troops to be there. There's no reason for our troops to be in Iraq to this day either. All of the justification, it's nonsense. They just want to keep military forces there. There are too many vested interests that benefit from having our troops in these places. They don't help our security. They're not needed to defend against anything. They're just there. They're easy targets for our adversaries, so that when they keep hitting us, instead of saying, hey, let's get them out of there so they're not just pointless targets, they say, how dare anybody have target this? Now we have to go and attack and kill somebody else here too. You see where this is going. It just continues to perpetuate. We have got to get to the point to where we start holding people accountable when they had these hideous, heinous failures, especially listen, it's one thing if you make a mistake. If you think that this is going to happen and actually this happens, and your calculated decision here turned out to be wrong. Other forces were at play and something else happened and there was a problem. It caused us a failure here, or possibly even a defeat in a tactical situation or something. That's one thing. And that can be forgiven because nobody's ever perfect. You can assess things all day long, but the enemy gets a vote, as they say. And sometimes they do stuff that you don't expect and it changes up everything. So that's one thing. But when you know the conditions and you lie, and that was the genesis of our talk with Matt, because he and I both had front row seats all during that disaster to be able to say, yes, these things you're being told about progress being made, being on the right azimuth, that the Afghan National Security Forces are getting better, blah, 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 always a lie. It was always a lie. There was little incremental things here and there, and there were little pieces of things that were said that were true, but these people always knew that the bigger issues were a lie, that the ANSF was not getting better. They knew it. I had access to classified material, so I can tell you conclusively that they knew what was really going on, but they said something sometimes like 180 degrees off of it, what was being said in the public. And Matt was also, because he was in the State Department in Afghanistan. That's how he had his access too. So we knew that. And you see, no one was ever held to account. You had David Petraeus, who was, this terrible, told all kinds of lies to the American people under oath in Congress, et cetera, was never held to account. Now then, everybody always wants to put a microphone on his face and say, yeah, tell us what you think today. There's no consequence. He's the same one. And we've shown him on this channel before, to where in May of last year, he very confidently said that the Ukraine side would have this offensive that would go to the Azov coast, that would crack, crumble, and maybe even dissolve the Russian defenses, and they could completely fall apart, etc. Even though I was been telling everybody, and I had written at the time, actually a month or so before that it would end in disaster. And I very specifically said all the reasons why, which played themselves out. He should have known those things, but for whatever reason, It was he lied to people and said something different and claimed an outcome that was. Was he held accountable? Did people come and say, Petraeus, you were dead wrong in Afghanistan. You lied about these things. You were so completely wrong with what you said in the Russia-Ukraine war. Everything you've said has nearly been wrong, especially that one. That was spectacularly wrong. They still put a microphone in his face. He still gets, large salaries from all different kind of organizations now, and there's no shortage of it. No one's held to account. No one seems to care about some of that stuff. We do, and we're going to continue to bring you the truth. But folks, listen, there's an end to this. I know that the people who do these things and the people who are at these upper echelons, they see that this is a path to success. They see that you can massage the truth a little bit, or you can fudge the outside, whatever. That's a euphemism for lying. And to make people believe something that is not true, that you know that they need to believe that in order for your thing to keep going forward and for your benefit to come, or the people that you support to be benefit. So we do it every day. It's a routine thing. I remember John Bolton not too long ago. Actually, no, it was about a year or so ago. He admitted that many of the things he said while he was the national security advisor for Trump were not true. That he had said a bunch of stuff because he was asked. They said, well, if you're so opposed to Trump now, why didn't you say something when you were in? And he said, oh, well, you have to say these things when you're in office, even if you don't believe them, because that's what you have to do for the job. Meaning you have to lie. So I don't believe this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And yet we know for a fact that he wasn't, because he himself told us. We showed in that other episode with Matt, you can look that up. It's also on our channel. I showed a juxtaposition of how you had the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, who testified in March of this year, 2024. He was claiming that, hey, I'm going to tell you the truth here, the hard truth, whether you want to hear it or not. And I told everybody that the Taliban was going to take over, that in my judgment, if we didn't change the diplomacy, that there was no chance that they could stand on their own. That's what he said under oath in public. And then right away, I played the clip from 2021, July 2021, to be specific, to where he stood up there in front of God and country and everybody else and says the Afghan National Security Forces are able to maintain their security. It is not inevitable that the Taliban will take over if we leave. That was a little under a month from when it would actually dissolve and fall apart. And so instead of acknowledging that he said that, I'm sure if you asked him in that hearing, he would have said, well, I just had to say that he's lying. Understand what that means. That means that when any American official, John Kirby, Jake Sullivan, any of these other people you see, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, when you see them up there and they're making all these claims, you know for certain that all of their predecessors say whatever they want you to hear so that you don't stop supporting their policies. But you know for sure that a lot of it is a lie. And there is an end to this at some point. At some point, the lies get stacked up so high, and that we support stupid policies that we never should, until at some point there's a collapse. And now all of a sudden we're genuinely harmed. That hasn't happened yet. And that's why it perpetuates. That's why it keeps going. That was kind of Matt's point there. And until we get that figured out, until we start holding people accountable, until we start saying, no, I'm tired. Don't put that microphone back in that general's face again. He's lied to us so many times and he's been dead wrong. I'm holding you to account. Remember, you said this. This is what happened. You lied about this here, and now then you lied in a different way here. So no, you have no more credibility. We're not going to listen to you. Until that kind of thing starts happening, and until our politicians start not getting elected, and we demand other candidates to step in who do have character and who are willing to tell the truth and who do have good ideas, until we start doing that, folks, this is going to keep going on. Matt is right. It's inevitable that these things will keep happening. And in one time, it won't just be an embarrassment like the loss in Afghanistan. It was catastrophic for the people of Afghanistan, but it was an embarrassment for us, which, Petraeus just shook the dust off his shoes and moved on, and it collected a big reward. Still to this day, he does, no matter what has happened before. That's going to have to change. So we're going to have to start doing whatever we can to hold people accountable, to hold their feet to the fire, to share information like this, to tag people with this on your social media accounts, to tweet things out, to use Telegram, whatever means that you have, Facebook, etc., anything. Say, no, here's the truth. Here's what these people said is not true. Here's what is. We have got to band together, folks, and do the best that we can, even as limited as we are. The bigger our numbers get, the better of a chance we have to hold people accountable and avoid the worst outcomes. And that's what we're going to do here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive, to continue giving you the ammunition and the weapons you need to tell of what the truth is, so that you can do what you can within your ability to be part of the solution. Thanks, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.